you guys have to forgive me. I'm really having a hard time with my eyes, and I can't hardly see at all. So I'm struggling to see the notes here. Today's message, God meant it for good, is going to be a simple story with a very powerful lesson that pertains to all of us. It is a story about a young man who went through a whole lot, but he trusted and waited on God. So God was able to turn evil into good. This is the story of Joseph. Now, there's one disclaimer that I have to say. The pictures that we're going to have as we're going through this, they are drawings, because you got to remember they didn't have cameras back then. So, sorry. It was a long time ago. All righty. Have you ever been maligned? Have you ever been misrepresented? Have you ever had anyone treat you extremely poorly? How about, have you ever had someone accuse you of something that you just didn't do? Or have you ever had someone just be evil towards you? Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was a former friend. Maybe it was somebody that you went to church with. Or even worse, maybe it was your own flesh and blood. Perhaps it was a child. Could have been a parent. Maybe a sister, a brother, maybe even an ex. Either way, it hurts deeply. Joseph had a rare and personal goodness, which seemed to reflect an inward morality. He was pure. He was active. He was joyous in all things. The young man had moral earnestness and steadfastness. He listened to his father's words and his instructions, and he loved to obey God. Gentleness, fidelity, truthfulness were all already manifested in him at a very young age. Jacob, because Joseph was the child of his deceased wife, Rachel, had unwisely shown a preference for Joseph, and this created a jealousy amongst his other sons against Joseph. The father's gift of a costly coat, usually worn by a person of distinction, stirred up distrust amongst the other brothers. That Jacob had intended to bypass the elder brothers for the birthright and give it to the son of Rachel. To make matters worse, Joseph told his brothers about a couple of dreams that he had seen. We've seen them in the video today. In these two dreams, his brothers bowed down to him, not realizing the impact that his words would have. Jacob told his brothers with excitement about these dreams. This incited great anger and jealousy towards Joseph. The brothers didn't know how to deal with all of those emotions at first, how to process them. Now, the brothers were all farmers or shepherds, and so they needed to move around place to place to find new pastures for their animals to feed off of. So they headed out towards the fields of Shechem. Joseph remained behind with his father at this point. Now, some time had passed before they had heard anything back from the brothers, so this worried the father, and he began to worry about their safety, because in the past they had been mean to the Shechemites, and so he was worried that something was going to happen to him. So Jacob asked Joseph to go down and check on them. Had Jacob really known their true feelings towards Joseph, he would have not trusted them to be alone with him. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, his brothers, to find his brothers, they weren't there. So he started to inquire around about that. And as he did, he found out that they had left and gone to Dothan. As Joseph approached Dothan, his siblings saw him coming, and they didn't have any brotherly love towards him, so they weren't excited about seeing him, right? Instead, their hearts were filled with resentment and hatred. That sight of the coat, the token of their father's love, filled them with rage. Behold, here comes the dreamer, they said. Envy and revenge controlled them. Let's kill him, and we'll throw him into some pit, and then we'll say to our father that some ferocious animal has devoured him. But Reuben, the oldest of all of the brothers, didn't agree with murdering his half-brother, and therefore he proposed that Joseph just be thrown into the pit and then let him perish that way. You see, secretly, Reuben had intended to come back and later rescue Joseph from the pit. Having persuaded his brothers to agree to this plan, Reuben slipped away so that he would not be caught in what he was wanting to do. When Joseph arrived, he was unaware of this danger that he was walking into. Instead of the expected greeting, he was met with revengeful stares. His brothers immediately seized him and stripped off his coat. Simeon tied his hands up, and then they drug him to the pit, and they pushed him in it, and then they were going to let him die. Fortunately, divinely, a company of travelers was seen approaching. It was a caravan of Ishmaelites, and they were on their way to Egypt with merchandise to trade there. And they often dealt in slavery too. So the brothers decided to sell Joseph to them instead of leaving them in that pit to die. After Joseph was gone, the brothers killed a goat, and then they dipped his coat in blood, and then they took it to their father. They told him that they had found it in the fields and that he must have been devoured by some wild animal. They were, however, not prepared for that gut-wrenching anguish their actions would cause their father. They didn't think that one out. Now, the first years of Joseph's life in Egypt were spent in the house of Potiphar, who became very impressed by Joseph's attitude in everything that he did. So eventually, Potiphar made him in charge of all of his business matters. Now, we're told in Genesis, his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hands. Genesis 39:3. The Bible also tells us that Joseph's personal appearance was as goodly and well-favored. In other words, Joseph was one good-looking guy. It wasn't too long before the wife of his master developed a physical attraction for him. She tried to entice him to sleep with him, but Joseph replied to her, listen to this, How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Notice that Joseph's thoughts were of the sin against God first, even before he thought about the wrongdoing that he would be doing to his master. I wonder if you and I, if we can say that same thing about us, that we think of God first. Now, this showed his righteous integrity and sincerity towards God. Unfortunately, Potiphar's wife got really, really angry about it because she felt rejected by the young man. To keep from sinning against God ultimately cost Joseph his position of respect. From a place of honor, he was cast into the prison as a common criminal. But once again, God vindicated Joseph, and he was once more honored by being placed in charge of all of the prisoners. Even in jail, he did not take his duty lightly. He accepted his position in this prison as if it had come directly from the hand of God. Though Joseph did not want to be locked up, he did his duties with joy. So thus far, 13 years had been passed between being a slave and being a prisoner, yet Joseph held on to his faith and patiently waited on God to work on his behalf. At the age of 30, Joseph divinely stood before the Pharaoh and interpreted the king's dreams. He told the Pharaoh that Egypt would experience 7 years of prosperity, but followed by 7 years of severe famine. Joseph did not take any of the credit for himself. Rather, he humbly gave honor to God for his ability to interpret the king's dreams. As a result, he was exalted to the second highest place in the kingdom, where he was given the responsibility of teaching the Egyptian senators wisdom that God had bestowed upon him. During the 7 years of plenty, Joseph made sure that Egypt laid up large quantities, grains of wheat and so forth. The tall ones, Gary, not the short ones. They didn't have GMOs back then, right? All right. When the famine had become so widespread, Jacob, his father, learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt. So he said to his sons, you need to stop talking about how awful this famine is and do something about it. I hear that Egypt has stored up lots of grain and is now selling it. So go down there and buy some so that we may eat and live. So the 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt to buy the food, all the food that they could. Now, by this time, Joseph had already been chief ruler in Egypt for 9 years when his brothers came to buy grain from them in Egypt. Joseph was the governor of Egypt. He was also in charge of all of the food supply and tasked with overseeing the selling of all of the grain that went to any foreigner. So any of the foreigners that were non-Egyptian citizens had to come see him personally to buy food because they wanted to make sure that it was secure, right? That they weren't just giving it out. Now his brothers didn't know who Joseph was when they got there because he was dressed in his Egyptian royal clothes. So they came and bowed before him to show their respect. Remember the dream before, right? Just as all the other people were doing, they were bowing down before him. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them immediately, but he acted as if he didn't know who they were. He spoke to them through an interpreter so to not reveal who he was. Joseph remembered his dreams that he had had before and what had happened when he told his brothers the dreams. So he was guarded. He wanted to see if their cruel attitudes had changed. So he spoke harshly to them through an interpreter. You men are spies and have come here to find the weak spots in our defenses. No, sir, they insisted. We are humble shepherds and are only here to buy food for our families. We are all brothers, Your Excellency. We are honest men, not spies. But Joseph quickly responded, no, I don't believe you. But the brothers answered back, sir, we are 12 brothers, sons of the same father who lives in Canaan. One of our brothers is dead, and the youngest one is still at home. Joseph questioned him, how do I know that you're telling the truth? I still think that you're spies. So I will test your honesty. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you had better pass this test. You will not leave until your youngest brother comes here so I can know that you are telling me the truth. One of you can go home and get him, and the rest of you will have to stay here under guard. If this so-called younger brother of yours does come back, then it will prove that you're telling me the truth. I'll give you a couple of days to think about which one of you will go home. And with that, Joseph ordered them to be locked up for 3 days in jail. After 3 days, Joseph had them brought back, and he said, since I am a God-fearing man myself, I have changed my mind. If you really are honest men, one of you can stay here, and the rest of you can buy food for your families, and you can return home to them. But you must come back with your younger brother, or the one who stays behind will be executed as a spy, because it will prove to me that you were lying. Joseph continued, now you decide among yourselves which one of you will stay here. Then Joseph excused himself and went into his office, and he wept. After he had gained his composure back, he returned to his brothers, and he interrupted them and said to them, I pick him, Simeon. He didn't know his name, but that's who he picked. He picked Simeon, the second oldest, to remain behind as ransom. He ordered Simeon's hands to be tied right there in front of his brothers, and Simeon was taken off to prison between two guards. Now, by the way, remember that we said it earlier that Simeon was the one that tied his hands, right? So this wasn't in retaliation. What it was there for was to see if their hearts had changed and to see how they would react, right? He wasn't being mean to them, all right? He just wanted to test them. Joseph sent a message to the granary manager asking him to fill the brothers' sacks with grain and then to give them extra food for the long journey back home. Now, the famine didn't end there. It got even worse. When Jacob's family had used up all the grain that they had brought back to them, they said, Jacob said to him again, you need to go back down to Egypt and buy more grain for us to live off of. But then Judah said, but Father, remember last time we were down in Egypt, how the governor told us to come back with our younger brother whom he wanted to see face to face. Now, if you're willing for us to take Benjamin, then we can go and buy some food. The days are passing and we need more grain. Otherwise, we're going to die, including you and the rest of our family. I promise to protect Benjamin and give my word that if something happens to him, you can take it out on me. Then Jacob said, well, if it has to be this way, then take a little bit of balm, some honey, some spices, some pistachio nuts, and almonds as a personal present, from me to the governor. Now, what's interesting to this, if you didn't catch this, is here is Jacob not realizing that he's sending gifts to his son. Pretty cool. All right, so then he says, take Benjamin, and you guys better get going. So the brothers packed their donkeys and left to Egypt with their youngest brother, Benjamin. By the way, now we always read in the Bible when we read it that Benjamin was a young lad. But what most of us don't realize is that when Benjamin went, he already had 10 sons. So he wasn't that young. He was just the youngest, okay? So he wasn't a young lad. Okay, it wasn't too long before they now stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin, he said to the steward, tell my servants to kill a young animal and prepare for an additional 11 guests because these men will be having lunch with me today. The steward did as he was told, and he took the 10 brothers, including Simeon, who had been in jail, to Joseph's house. Now, because they were being taken to the governor's palace, all of the brothers became extremely afraid. When they got there, the brothers were seated facing Joseph, according to their age, from the oldest to the youngest. The brothers noticed this and were amazed that the governor knew how to arrange them, but they didn't catch on why. They just knew that something was strange there. Then they were served food from Joseph's table. Now, this was kind of strange or unusual because Egyptians did not socialize with Hebrew men. So that was the first thing that was very weird. So that's why they were getting quite a bit nervous. And then the other thing was, because he was the governor, he was the second highest in the whole land, nobody ate at his table except for anybody that was of really high status, right? Okay, so they were just simple shepherds, and they're wondering why this is going on. When they sat down, Benjamin was offered 5 times as much food as his brothers was to test them, but not one of them showed any jealousy whatsoever. They ate and they drank happily together. Now, this really pleased Joseph, but he still wasn't done testing them yet. He wanted to be sure that they had completely changed before he would reveal himself to them. When the meal was over, Joseph said in Egyptian to the steward in charge of his house, fill up their sacks with as much food as they can carry and put each man's money back into their sack. Also put my own silver drinking cup into the youngest man's sack. Steward did as he was told. At daylight the next morning, the brothers were sent on their way with their donkeys, loaded with grain. They had not been gone very long when Joseph said to the servant in charge of his house, "Take some armed guards with you and go after these men. And when you catch them, I want you to say to them, 'Why have you been so wicked as to take advantage of the governor's kindness and hospitality? One of you has stolen my master's silver drinking cup. How ungrateful can you be?' When the guards reached the brothers, they searched the sacks, and they found Joseph's cup in Benjamin's sack. They were then brought back in front of Joseph, and Joseph was told that it was Benjamin that had stolen his cup. Judah fell before Joseph and pleaded with him not to imprison Benjamin. 'Sir, I pledged my own life to our father for the safety of the youngest brother. I told our father that if I did not bring him back, that he could blame me for the rest of my life. So please let me be your slave and let him go back with his brothers. How can I go back home to our father without him?' Joseph was now convinced that his brothers really had changed and became men of integrity. By this time, Joseph was no longer able to control his emotions, and so he ordered his servants to leave. 'I am Joseph,' he exclaimed in Hebrew this time. His brothers were so stunned, they just stood there speechless. Then Joseph said, come closer and see for yourselves.' When they finally did, he said, 'I am really Joseph, your brother, the one that you sold into slavery into Egypt. God has turned your wrongdoing into a blessing to actually preserve your lives. God brought good out of your anger and towards me and used it to save all of our lives, including the lives of our family. So it wasn't you who sent me here, but rather it was God instead. And God has made me the highest official in the land next to Pharaoh.'" Notice once again how Joseph sincerely gave God credit for turning evil into good. Do we do that, or do we take credit ourselves? Now, Joseph went on to explain how he was shown how long the famine would last. So Joseph said, "This is only the second year of the famine, and there will still be 5 more years to go, during which there will be no more plowing, no more sowing, no more reaping. Hurry home and tell our father that his son Joseph is still alive and that I am governor of all of Egypt. Then, as quickly as you can, move back here so that you can make it through the next 5 years of the drought." So Joseph said goodbye and sent his brothers on their way to Canaan. When they got home, they told Jacob that Joseph was still alive and that he was a governor of all of Egypt. Jacob's heart nearly stopped because he simply could not have believed it. They told him everything that had happened and admitted what they had done by selling Joseph many years before. Then they took their father outside to see the Egyptian wagons which Joseph had sent to them by order of the Pharaoh. So Jacob moved to Egypt with all of his family and everything he owned. Jacob himself lived another 17 years after he moved to Egypt. So he was 147 years old when he died. Shortly after Jacob died, Joseph's brothers said to one another, "Now that our father is dead, what if Joseph still holds a grudge against us for selling him as a slave and wants to get even back at us?" So they sent a messenger ahead of their arrival to Joseph with a letter that read, "Remember that our father spoke to you about forgiving us before he died when he was alive. So please tell us that you have forgiven us, for we all are servants of the same God our fathers worshipped." When Joseph read this letter, he wept bitterly because his brothers still thought that he might be vindictive. A few hours later, his brothers arrived. After they were ushered in, they once again fell on their knees, bowing down before Joseph and said, "We are willing to be your slaves." Again, there's the dream coming true again, right? Joseph shook his head and said to them, "Don't kneel before me, get up." When they were standing there in front of him, he says, "Am I not in the place of God to carry out judgments on anyone? So don't be afraid. I'm not going to do anything to you. You intended harm to me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. I've forgiven you and will continue to feed you and your family from the royal granaries as I've been told to do so by the Pharaoh." Joseph had the privilege of sustaining his brothers for many, many more years after his father died and overseeing the fulfillment of his youthful dreams. During Joseph's life of 110 years, we have no record of him ever being untrue to God in any way. So the lessons of Joseph's are many. How do we act when we've been wronged by others? Are we men and women of integrity, or do we want to get revenge? Do we choose retaliation over representation? In other words, do we want to get back at people who have wronged us, or is it more important to represent God appropriately? What about when we find that trouble comes our way? Do we wait on the Lord to fulfill his promise? "For I know the plans that I have for you," declares the Lord. "Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to forgive you, or to give you hope and a future," Jeremiah 29:11. Or do we find that we try to make our own plans instead of waiting on the Lord to work on our behalf? If you're like me, it is so easy to be impatient and to get in the way of the Lord doing his work that would have otherwise resulted in us to prosper if we would have just waited on the Lord. Jeremiah 29. Isaiah 40:31. "But they who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings of eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall speak and not faint." I want to ask you, do we sometimes try to fly before God has given us the wings of eagles? The word says in Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." But strengthening takes time. It is the repetitive exercise that causes us to gain the strength. Like Joseph, we often have to go through long hardships to develop a Christ-like character. Again, I ask you, do you think that it was by accident that the Bible states, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose," Romans 8:28. For all things to work for good, notice that we must first love God, and second, wait on him to call us for his purpose. I'm supposing I'm supposing that if we love God, we will want to wait on him to do his work in us. Amen. Philippians 1:6 declares, He who began the work in you will, it's a promise, carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. He will do the work, but we must be willing to let him use us for his purpose. Joseph said to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. How often I forget that God is in control even when I am in the darkest struggles in my life. Because Jesus died on that cross, he bought us from our wages of our own sin. And this puts him in complete and utter control. I pray that God will teach me, that he will teach you to be like Joseph, always knowing no matter what the circumstances, that Christ will one day turn it around for our own good. Oh, it may not be here in this lifetime, but if we wait on the Lord, if we let him work in us, the good will definitely be for an eternity. Praise God that he loves us so much that he is always directing our footsteps when we wait on him and allow him to do so. As we close out today's worship service, I want to ask you to just sit and listen to our closing song. It's really a powerful song. It's about waiting on the Lord. It's called I Will Wait.